Think the 1950s were boring and modest? Think again. Behind the curtain of family values, there was a secret war being fought over what was allowed on the screen. Today, we're opening the forbidden archives to reveal the images that were considered too dangerous for the public eye. We're looking at the iconic stars who dared to break the rules, wearing outfits that caused national scandals, and filming scenes that were nearly burned by the authorities. These films didn't just push the boundaries, they shattered them, showcasing a level of boldness that was strictly prohibited. From the French Rebellion that changed fashion forever, to the Hollywood moments that were almost lost to the censors, we are uncovering the hidden side of cinema history. This isn't the innocent past you were taught in school. This is the part they tried to hide. Welcome to Part 2. Let's dive in. Number 10. Baby Doll, 1956. Elia Kazan. Baby Doll caused a cultural earthquake that nearly leveled the American film industry. While other movies of the era only hinted at attraction, this film wallowed in a humid, decaying sense of biological tension that felt dangerously tactile. The story features Carol Baker as a young woman trapped in a strange, stunted existence, sleeping in a literal crib, while her desperate older husband waits for a specific date on the calendar to finally claim his marital rights. The atmosphere of the film isn't just psychological, it's visceral. Director Elia Kazan captured the sticky, oppressive heat of the Mississippi Delta so effectively that you can almost smell the rot of the old plantation house through the screen. The most notorious sequence, which led to the film being condemned from pulpits across the country, involves a rival businessman engaging in a slow, predatory game of manipulation with a young wife. The way the camera lingers on her skin and her infantile, vulnerable behavior while being targeted by a calculated outsider was considered a direct assault on public standards. Authorities warned that witnessing this film was a grave moral failing, leading to mass boycotts and theaters being picketed by thousands of protesters. Behind the scenes, Kazan pushed his actors to tap into their most primal, uncomfortable instincts, creating a performance that felt so raw it threatened the very foundation of the studio system. Baby Doll presented a world of arrested development and forbidden obsession that left a permanent stain on the history of cinematic morality. Number 9. The Moon is Blue, 1953. Otto Preminger. This is the film that started a war over a few forbidden words. In 1953, the censors didn't just look for skin. They policed language with a religious fervor. The Moon is Blue became a historic target because director Otto Preminger refused to remove the words virgin, seduce, and mistress from the script. To the modern ear, it sounds harmless, but in the early 50s, these were biological realities that the censors believed would literally corrupt the minds of the American public. The film was denied the Motion Picture Association's seal of approval, which technically made it illegal to show in most mainstream theaters. Preminger, a man who thrived on provocation, decided to release it anyway, turning the film into a massive, forbidden event. The movie depicts a young woman who openly discusses her chastity and her views on sex with two men in a sophisticated Manhattan apartment. It was the casual nature of the conversation that terrified the authorities. The idea that a woman could have agency over her own biology without being punished by the plot was a radical, forbidden concept. The state of Maryland even attempted to ban the film entirely, leading to a massive legal battle. On set, Preminger's directorial style was famously tyrannical, creating a high-pressure environment that made the rapid-fire, sexually charged dialogue feel like a machine gun of forbidden ideas. By the time the dust settled, The Moon is Blue had proven that the censors' power was crumbling, paving the way for a more honest adult cinema where human biology could finally be discussed out loud. Number 8. The Bad Seed, 1956, Mervyn LeRoy. The Bad Seed is a chilling exploration of biological predestination that horrified the 1950s by suggesting that pure, unadulterated evil could be carried in the blood of an innocent-looking child. At a time when the family unit was considered a sacred, untouchable institution, this film arrived like a cold blade, presenting an 8-year-old girl named Rhoda who was a cold-blooded, calculating killer. The horror isn't found in shadows or monsters, but in the terrifyingly polite and rehearsed behavior of a child who commits murder for a simple gold medal. The film dared to ask a forbidden question. Is a person born broken? Or can a mother's love truly overwrite the dark code of genetics? This biological nihilism was so provocative that it bypassed the usual censors of flesh and focused instead on the corruption of the soul, forcing the audience to confront the idea that the innocence of childhood was a lie. The production was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Director Mervyn LeRoy kept the atmosphere on set incredibly tense, ensuring that the young actress playing Rhoda maintained a chilling, mechanical detachment that felt unnatural and biologically wrong. The film's ending was so controversial and dark that the censors demanded a bizarre, artificial addition, a final scene where the young actress is spanked by her screen mother after the credits, and a warning to the audience not to reveal the climax. This was a desperate attempt by the studio to break the tension and remind the public that this was just a play. However, the damage was already done. The bad seed tapped into a deep, primal fear of the enemy within the household, suggesting that some biological roots are too deep to be pruned by morality or religion. It remains one of the most disturbing studies of the forbidden nature of inherited darkness ever captured on celluloid. Number 7. Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, 1951, Albert Lewin. Pandora and the Flying Dutchman is a fever dream of obsessive desire and metaphysical transgression, filmed in a Technicolor palette so intense it feels like a biological hallucination. Starring Ava Gardner at the absolute height of her animalistic beauty and James Mason as the cursed wanderer, the film explores a love that defies the boundaries of life, death, and the divine. The forbidden nature of this film lies in its depiction of an all-consuming, pagan-like passion that renders the laws of man and God completely irrelevant. Gardner plays a woman who is so bored by the standard morality of her suitors that she is willing to destroy her own physical life just to touch the eternal. The camera treats Gardner's presence not just as a performance, but as a force of nature, capturing a raw, magnetic sensuality that the censors found difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. The filming process in Spain was legendary for its chaotic and emotionally charged atmosphere. Ava Gardner was living a life as uninhibited as her character, engaging in a high-profile affair with a bullfighter, while her husband, Frank Sinatra, was spiraling into a jealous frenzy back in the States. This real-life biological chaos bled into every scene, giving the film a weight of genuine, dangerous longing that felt far more real than the sanitized romances Hollywood usually produced. The film's director, Albert Lewin, was obsessed with creating a literary visual style, filling the screen with symbols of ancient mythology and carnal sacrifice. The censors were baffled by the film's refusal to preach a moral lesson. Instead, it glorified a suicidal, eternal devotion that placed human instinct above all else. It is a landmark of the forbidden romantic archive, proving that the most powerful desires are those that are willing to burn the world down just to exist for a single, timeless moment. Number 6. The Wild One, 1953, László Benedek. The Wild One didn't just depict a riot. It acted as a biological trigger for an entire generation of disaffected youth, effectively inventing the concept of the rebel without a cause. Starring a young, brooding Marlon Brando, the film was so feared by authorities that it was banned in the United Kingdom by the British Board of Film Censors for an incredible 14 years. The forbidden nature of the film wasn't about traditional sin, but about the raw, animalistic threat of aimless masculine energy and the total collapse of social order. Brando's character, Johnny, became a symbol of a new kind of biological defiance, a man who didn't just break the rules, but didn't even acknowledge their existence. When asked what he was rebelling against, his iconic response, "What do you got?" signaled a terrifying shift in the cultural landscape that the censors were desperate to suppress. The production was a masterclass in capturing raw, unscripted tension. Brando brought a revolutionary internal method acting style that felt uncomfortably real and physically intimidating to the more traditional actors on set. The camera focused on his leather-clad presence and the rhythmic, vibrating roar of the motorcycles, creating a sensory experience that felt like a direct assault on the quiet, suburban values of the 1950s. Authorities were terrified that the film would act as a how-to guide for juvenile delinquency, fearing that its biological charge would incite real-world violence and chaos. The film was blamed for corrupting the youth and was heavily restricted in numerous American cities. Even the way Brando moved, mumbling his lines and leaning with a heavy, gravitational confidence, was seen as a rejection of civilized behavior. The Wild One remains a landmark in the archive of the forbidden, proving that the most dangerous thing you can show an audience is the image of someone who is truly, biologically free from the fear of authority. Number 5. A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951, Elia Kazan. A Streetcar Named Desire arrived as a brutal, sweaty explosion of adult reality that the Hollywood censorship boards were almost powerless to contain. Based on the play by Tennessee Williams, the film is a visceral study of the collision between fading, fragile delusions and raw, animalistic biology. The central conflict between Blanche Dubois and Stanley Kowalski is a battle of the nerves, played out in the claustrophobic, humid heat of a New Orleans tenement. The forbidden power of the film lay in its unapologetic depiction of carnal desire, madness, and the primal nature of human attraction. The censors at the Breen office were absolutely horrified, demanding over 60 cuts to the film to tone down the bestial nature of Marlon Brando's performance and the clear implications of a physical violation that shattered the heroine's mind. Director Elia Kazan fought a war for every frame, trying to preserve the raw biological honesty of the story. He used low-key lighting and cramped sets to increase the feeling of physical pressure, making the audience feel the sweat and the desperation of the characters. Marlon Brando Stanley was a new kind of screen presence, a man who lived entirely through his instincts, wearing torn t-shirts and radiating a magnetic, dangerous sexuality that felt like a direct challenge to the polite standards of the era. The censors were particularly obsessed with the biological heat between the leads, forcing Kazan to remove footage that showed any level of female desire or satisfaction. Despite these attempts to sanitize the rot, the film's power was undeniable. It forced the American public to look at the dark, messy reality of human biology and the devastating consequences of suppressed trauma. A Streetcar Named Desire didn't just push the boundaries of what could be shown, it tore them down, proving that the truth of the human heart is often far more forbidden than any image of flesh. Number 4. Island of Lost Souls, 1932, Earl C. Kenton. Although this film was released just as the heavy iron curtain of the Hays Code was beginning to fall, its biological horror was so visceral and disturbing that it remained under a total ban in the United Kingdom and several other countries for over 30 years. This wasn't merely a monster movie, it was a nightmarish deconstruction of human nature itself, featuring Charles Laughton as the sadistic Dr. Monroe, a man who carves animals into human shapes through agonizing, unmedicated surgical procedures in his house of pain. The forbidden power of the film lay in its blasphemous invasion of the divine role and the terrifying biological question it forced upon the audience. Where exactly does animal instinct end and the human soul begin? The most provocative element, the one that made censors physically recoil, was Monroe's calculated attempt to breed a human man with his creation, the Panther Woman, played by Kathleen Burke. This blatant suggestion of interspecies breeding was a biological taboo that Hollywood wouldn't dare to touch again for nearly half a century. The atmosphere on set was one of genuine psychological decay. Lewin played Monroe with such a greasy, refined cruelty that his fellow actors reportedly felt a deep instinctive revulsion toward him during filming. The makeup for the Beastmen was so revolutionary and grotesque that it caused actual physical nausea in 1930s test audiences, leading to reports of people fleeing theaters. When the censors witnessed the scenes where the creatures finally snap, realizing their own raw predatory power, they were terrified that the film would incite a literal revolt of the masses against the ruling classes. The film was officially labeled biologically offensive and an insult to the human race. As a result, Island of Lost Souls became one of the most suppressed films in history, a permanent landmark in the archive of the forbidden that reminds us that beneath the thin, fragile veneer of civilization, the beast within is always waiting for the surgeon's knife to slip. Number 3. Tea and Sympathy, 1956, Vincente Minnelli. This film represents one of the most sophisticated and dangerous victories over the 1950s censorship apparatus as it dared to explore a subject that officially did not exist: male vulnerability and the suspicion of a deviant biological orientation. Set within the rigid, hyper-masculine environment of a boys' boarding school, the story follows Tom Lee, a young man who is subjected to a brutal, systematic campaign of bullying because he is different. He prefers music to sports, shows empathy instead of aggression, and fails to perform the aggressive biological rituals required of his gender. In an era of absolute conformity, this was a direct assault on the American masculine ideal. The censors at the Breen office scrutinized every line of the script with a magnifying glass, demanding the total removal of any direct mention of the forbidden lifestyle, forcing the filmmakers to develop an incredibly complex, secret language of gestures, lingering glances, and heavy subtext to tell the truth. Director Vincente Minnelli used his mastery of visual storytelling to heighten this forbidden tension, turning a psychological drama into a deep biological study of human isolation. The camera obsessively tracks Tom's nervous movements and his painful physical reactions to the social pressure, making the audience feel the weight of his exclusion. The final scene, where Deborah Kerr's character decides to offer sympathy to help the boy prove his identity to himself, was so close to the edge of the permissible that it was famously called the most decent, indecent moment in movie history. Conservative groups attempted to ban the film entirely, viewing its defense of the outsider as a direct threat to the traditional fabric of society. Tea and Sympathy remains a monumental entry in the Forbidden Archives, a testament to an era when the most intimate parts of human nature had to be whispered with such intensity that the whisper eventually drowned out the screams of the moralists. Number 2. Manina, The Girl in the Bikini, 1952, Willy Rozier. Long before she became a global icon of rebellion, a young Brigitte Bardot starred in this French production that was designed to challenge the very foundations of social modesty. Manina serves as a visual manifesto of freedom, set against the backdrop of a sun-drenched lighthouse island. In 1952, the protagonist's choice of a minimalist two-piece beach outfit was a radical act that sent shockwaves through the industry. This wasn't just a costume, it was a provocative tool aimed directly at the heart of global censorship, which, at the time, demanded total coverage and strict moral codes. The film focuses on the natural aesthetics of island life, presenting a bold, unapologetic femininity that terrified conservative authorities with its sheer confidence. The international scandal surrounding the film was immediate and explosive. When the movie reached foreign markets, promotional posters featuring Bardot in her revolutionary attire were often seized or covered by local law enforcement. Censors were paralyzed by the film's refusal to follow traditional rules. It didn't offer a moral lecture, but instead celebrated a sense of physical liberation that was considered far too advanced for the era. Director Willy Rozier leaned into the charismatic presence of his lead actress, using atmospheric, lingering shots that bypassed the era's strict standards. This project effectively launched a wave of cultural shifts that would eventually dismantle the walls of cinematic tradition. Manina remains a crucial entry in the Forbidden Archives, proving that sometimes the most daring act a filmmaker can perform is simply capturing a figure who refuses to conform to the rules of the past. Number 1. The 7-Year Itch, 1955, Billy Wilder. This is the film that created the most iconic, biologically charged image in the history of global cinema, nearly destroying a high-profile marriage in the process. While the censors were busy looking for full nudity, Marilyn Monroe and director Billy Wilder delivered a masterclass in visual suggestion that felt more provocative than any forbidden art house film. The legendary sequence where Monroe stands over a subway grate, her white dress swirling up to reveal her legs and undergarments, was a direct, calculated attack on the era's modesty. In 1955, showing this much of the female form was considered a biological provocation of the highest order. The shoot took place on a public street in New York at 2 a.m., surrounded by thousands of leering fans and photographers, creating a chaotic, hyper-sexualized energy that was captured perfectly on the celluloid. The behind-the-scenes reality was even more scandalous. Monroe's husband at the time, baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, was present during the filming of the subway scene and was so enraged by the public exposure of his wife's body that he reportedly got into a violent physical altercation with her back at their hotel. This real-life domestic explosion only added to the film's forbidden allure. To bypass the strict production code, which forbade showing a man and a woman in an extramarital affair, Wilder had to use every trick in the book, focusing the camera on the sweat on the actor's skin, the cooling of bodies, and the raw, magnetic pull of Monroe's presence. The film was a massive hit because it allowed the audience to participate in a forbidden fantasy, proving that a single, strategically placed gust of wind could be more dangerous to the moral fabric of society than 1,000 pages of banned dialogue. These 10 films were more than just entertainment. They were calculated acts of defiance that exploited every loophole in the system to bring a new sense of reality to the screen. They proved that no matter how many laws were passed or how many scenes were edited, the pull of authentic human presence would always find a way to break through the shadows. These directors and stars risked their reputations to push the boundaries of what was considered acceptable, paving the way for a cultural revolution that was just around the corner. Does modern cinema feel too safe compared to the risks these legends took nearly a century ago? Which of these forbidden archives surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And let me know which city or country you're watching from. I love seeing where our most curious viewers are located. If you're ready to continue descending into the hidden and scandalous history of the silver screen, hit that like button and subscribe. The past is never as innocent as it looks. I'll see you in the next chapter of the Forbidden Archives.